Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus, episode 178, the triple review for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Furiosa, A Mad Max Story, and Bad Boys Ride or Die. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the North, South, East, and West, and welcome to another episode of Film Focus. I'm your host, the Hypersonic 55, and I'm glad that you decided to join me once again for some film-related discussion. And yes, I know it has been quite some time since the last time I not only posted an episode, but also did any reviews. And yes, as per usual, that thing called life happened and really threw me for a loop. I've been all over the place dealing with a number of personal issues that have just prevented me from doing this on the regular. And the annoying thing is I have actually been to the cinema. I have seen films. However, just because of my new job that I've acquired recently, timing wise now, it has proved to be difficult to find time to not only watch these films, but also get back home and record. So I have only just recently come across a nice little window of time that I can do this, so that's why I'm here. So yeah, I have interesting opinions to put out there for each film, so I will be reviewing each film in said order, and as per usual I'll be talking about the story, characters, presentation, and overall conclusion. Now, these reviews will be slightly less than the more meaty ones, just because I think even though I have a fair amount to say about each film, at the same time I feel like it would probably be smaller than a standard episode, so I just wanted to put them all together just so I have these out there, but not in a format where I feel like, I'm waffling for the sake of trying to extend an episode length. So I can't tell you for sure how long each episode will be. Well, I mean, each segment will be for each review, but I'll do my best. But obviously there'll be time codes in the description, and yeah, I guess that's it. So without further ado, let's move on to those apes. Alright, so let's talk about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Now, prior to this film's release, it was definitely one of my most anticipated films of the year, definitely within my top 5, possibly top 3. It was just behind Doom Part 2 and another film that I can't remember at the moment, but yeah. The recent Planet of the Apes trilogy are not only one of my favorite films in the last 10 years, but I would say probably some of my favorite films ever. The journey of Caesar through those 3 films was just fantastic, emotional, heartwarming, heartbreaking, and it was just done in a way where no one expected a return to the Planet of the Apes franchise to hit so hard, to be so interesting, well crafted, and for you to really get on board with not only Caesar but a bunch of the other apes that surrounded him, to the point where you cared about them more so than the humans. But they were also able to tell a story where you were able to understand the conflict and need to survive from not only the ape point of view but also the humans, where there are conflicts of interest and everybody's just trying to survive in the way that they feel is best for their, respective parties. But some people aren't doing it for the right reasons, or some people think they're doing it for the right reasons, but it bears some pretty disastrous results. So when it was announced that there was going to be another film in this franchise, which I think a lot of people assumed that there was going to be at some point, I think a lot of us were concerned because the way that War for the Planet of the Apes ended, it ended in such a solid way where if that was the end, that would be fine. But with this being such a notable franchise, we knew it was going to continue. So after a good amount of time, we found out this was going to be taking place how many years away from the end of War for the Planet of the Apes. We had Wes Ball of the Maze Runner film fame helming this film. He's helming this film. And we finally started to see who was going to be cast and start to get a feel for what's going on with the plot and all that. And the first trailer definitely left a solid impression. The second one was pretty good as well. And I feel like a lot of us were hopeful that this film was following in the footsteps of the foundation that was laid with the previous trilogy. And having seen it now twice since the time of its release, I've definitely had time to sit on it. And I will say that it's another solid entry within this series, but I would say in terms of how to rank it, it'd probably be the bottom of the set for reasons which I will explain as we go on. But yeah, just in terms of what the plot is for this new film, it basically takes place 300 years since the events of War for the Planet of the Apes, and our new protagonist is a young chimpanzee by the name of Noah. He's living his life with his two best friends in his little ape society, and things seem to be going well for a little while. However, due to an incident, he ends up going on a pretty epic journey alongside a human woman known as May, to basically figure out what will be the future for not only the apes but also the humans as well. And that's a way for me to summarize the plot without going into the area of spoilers. Now, I thought this film was pretty good, at least in terms of its plot anyway. There is some really interesting themes, and I like the atmosphere, the visual design, and how there is definitely a sense of continuity that comes from the previous films, but it's able to carve out its own new interesting things when it comes to how it handles certain characters and plot beats as well. I really enjoyed the change in time and the setting as well. It allowed you to bask in this sort of new world where the apes are definitely way more prominent than they ever were before, and the humans are definitely on the back foot. They're out in the wild, scattered, and basically being hunted is not a great situation for us humans in that not near future, that distant future, I guess. But yeah, it's just fun to see what a film will bring to the table where the apes are front and center. You really get to see their rules of society and how they've basically taken what we saw primarily in Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes and then just advanced it. Seeing all the little evolutions and adjustments that they've made is pretty interesting. And then seeing how there are different groups who believe in different things and how they come into conflict with each other with pretty disastrous results. I like how there was a decent balance of drama, conflict, moments of introspection, but also unexpected moments of humor as well. And that's not to say there hasn't been humor in the previous films, but this film had a lot more levity and humor than I was expecting. But it was done in a way which felt right, and its timing was pretty solid, which I quite enjoyed. And this film does a lot with its themes about history, legacy, and myth. So obviously, the history of Caesar's actions echo through to the future. However, there are some who remember it, some who only remember pieces, and then there are those who, I guess, know what the history is, but choose to manipulate it for their own nefarious needs. And that's obviously, pointing at that Proximus Caesar bastard over there. But yeah, it's just interesting how certain people take the history and then choose to use it or not use it, and how it influences others. And I just like seeing how that whole thing played out in the film. I will say though that even though I enjoyed this plot quite a bit, this film didn't have that je ne sais quoi, that super hard hitting emotional punch that came with the previous films that really allowed it to stand up with that original trilogy. That's not to say it didn't try, but I feel like the writing duo of, I believe it was Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver who penned the previous trilogy, even though they were involved, I think, with producing the story for this, I don't think they wrote this new film. And I feel like you can tell that their specific touch when it comes to writing these types of films was missing. Because the new writer for this film, while they've created some definitely cool and interesting ideas, it just doesn't seem to hit as heavy. And while I'm not expecting every film in like a series to be consistently great every time, because that is a tricky task to do in itself, I do feel like this series, we've seen how great it can be. And this one just didn't quite hit the mark in terms of the plot area. But again, I will say that it's still another solid entry in this series and has some pretty interesting things to say. In terms of the characters, I liked them for the most part. I would say obviously the main people that you'll really be paying attention to is the main chimpanzee, who's Noah. You have the main human, who is May. You also have Raka, who is the new dude who looks like Maurice from the previous films, and then obviously Proximus Caesar, who is the main bad guy. Now there are other characters involved as well, but they are not as significant to the main plot. But yeah, just talking about the characters real quick. Owen Teague as Noah was pretty solid. He inserted a nice balance of confidence, yet fear, naivety, and willingness to be open to change. He still has a lot to learn, not only about himself and the way that life works within his ape society, but also about the revelations of the past and how certain other apes have used the history of Caesar to manipulate and change things in a dangerous way. And I think Noah's a decent protagonist. He definitely has his moments, and he grows over the course of the film to the point where you'll root for him and want to see him succeed. And then you have Kevin Durand as Proximus Caesar. He's pretty darn good. He is very charismatic, very manipulative, and he's definitely one of those sort of characters who has like two faces: the face that he shows to the public and the face that he shows behind closed doors. And it's interesting that sometimes when things aren't going his way, the real side of him tends to flare up every so often. But yeah, Duran did a really good job in this role. I do wish that the character had a little bit more to him, because while he certainly has a level of depth to him in terms of his plans and how he chooses to talk to certain people in certain ways, I do feel like there was just an extra thing missing from him that would have made him super solid. But then you have my boy Raka, played by Peter Macon. He was great. Raka, I didn't expect to love this dude as much as I did, but this orangutan is amazing. He is wise, he knows about the history of things, and the way he approaches stuff, there is this level of caution yet calmness, this wise old man energy that he has, and he was easily my favorite character in the film, essentially. And I also quite liked Noah's friends, who were Anaya and Suna. They were pretty good as well. And I guess the only other major character to mention would be Freya Allen as May. She was a very interesting character because obviously, unlike a bunch of the other humans who are in existence right now, she is smart, she's perceptive, she knows how to hide and choose to do things and present herself when the right time comes along. And her journey throughout this film alongside Noah is very interesting, just to see how they interact initially, come together, and then how their story ends. She has her own mission and a pretty interesting backstory, and Alan did a pretty good job in this role. She's pretty solid. And I guess the only other person that's worth mentioning is William H. Macy. He sort of shows up at this interesting period in the film, and while he doesn't contribute as much as I would have liked, he was still pretty solid in the role. And then, of course, you have the presentation, which, of course, was pretty darn good, especially on the visual front. The visual effects going on for this film was great. The CGI on the apes is so good. The amount of close-ups on the ape characters, to the point where you get to see all of their faces doing all these various expressions and see the apes under various different lighting and weather conditions. Their designs are so realistic and impressive to the point where you kind of forget that it's visual effects, that, like, this stuff was done digitally. And then you have the music from John Paisano. Now, I quite like this composer. His work on the Maze Runner films is where I probably first heard his work, but I am definitely a bigger fan of his work on the Spider-Man video game, starting out with the 2018 Marvel Spider-Man video game for PS4, and then what he did with Miles Morales and his recent entry with Spider-Man 2. And Paisano did a pretty good job of continuing the work that Michael Giacchino laid out. And his music in this film feels consistent yet has its own unique spin to it, where it's dramatic, emotional, matches what's happening on screen. And while it doesn't reach the heights of Giacchino's work, Paisano definitely creates an interesting sound for this film that works. So yeah, in the end, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is a solid entry in this series. While it doesn't reach those same heights of the previous films, and at worst you could probably call it just more of the same and or being redundant, I do feel like there's enough in this film that warrants a watch. So yeah, if you haven't seen it already, give it a watch. Alright, now it's time to talk about Furiosa, a Mad Max story. Now, prior to this film coming out, I was definitely interested, but more so concerned just to know whether Furiosa would be able to live up to the expectations laid out from Fury Road. Now, Mad Max Fury Road is one heck of a film. It's a well-crafted, meticulously made film that is surprising that it exists in the quality that it does, considering the nature of its production and how long it'd been since the previous Mad Max film. But they did a really good job, George Miller and his team, of creating a film that has obviously stuck through the test of time and has only been appraised with more love from more people who have seen it and just its fans in general. This is gone down as one of the most hyped films in film history for a lot of people, especially in the action department. And for me, I definitely see where everyone's coming from with that. It's just that for me, Fury Road is good, very, very good, but it doesn't quite scratch that 5-star department for me. It's close, but just not quite close enough. But yeah, anyway, moving on to Furiosa. It's interesting that this film was initially going to be a sequel to Fury Road, but for whatever reason they decided to go with a prequel, which whenever you're going backwards in time, it does make you question, some of the reasons as to why. But hey, it's George Miller. Let's just see what he does. And slowly but surely, as we started to see the trailers come out, I was like, okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm not overly keen on the style of the cinematography. You could tell that it was similar to what came before, but it was a little bit more stylized. But my main issue was that it was too clean. I didn't like how just sharp and clear and lacking there was in just the dirt and grittiness of the world that I'd come to expect from the previous entries. And I'm assuming that was just because of the extra use of visual effects involved. But I was like, you know what? This super clean presentation could be just a minor nitpick if the rest of the film is great. And it was looking pretty solid with the performances that I was seeing, the little snippets I was seeing from Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth. So I was like, okay, I'll give the film a chance. And after seeing it, I think either on opening night or pretty close to it, actually, no, I think it was within the first week. But yeah, I saw it and I thought it was pretty good, but I wasn't blown away. And that was the thing. Prior to its release, there were some people that were either praising it that George Miller, he rose from the grave again and gave us an amazing film, or there were some people saying, oh yeah, this film, it's all right. It's not as good as the previous one. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the film quite a bit. I think it does a great job of expanding the world and giving the wasteland more layers and seeing certain characters and certain places prior to where they were in Fury Road was pretty cool. And you can tell that there's been a lot of effort put in to create this world, its character and its rules. It's very well thought out, and I do like the visuals. It certainly has a unique style when it comes to shot composition, choice of scene transitions, and the color schemes, especially the color schemes. They're cool. But yeah, let's just talk about the story real quick. So obviously, as you could tell from the trailers, this is a prequel and an origin story for Furiosa. So prior to the events of Fury Road, we get to follow Furiosa over a set amount of time where she is stolen from her home by the warlord Dementus, has to deal with his BS for a while, somehow gets away from him and gets into the service of Immortan Joe at a younger period of his life, and then come up with a way to build herself up, take revenge, and then go off on her own little journey. So yeah, the plot surrounding Furiosa's backstory and how she interacted with Dementus and Immortan Joe was pretty cool, and there was some interesting and unexpected elements that came with this film, especially with its use of humor. I feel like this story obviously was very different from Fury Road, especially with the way they chose to present it. It felt like it was a mix of the original Mad Max, The Road Warrior, and Fury Road mixed into one. And I quite enjoy just seeing, again, more of this world and getting like a sense of like the space between locations and what the rules were, and just feeling that like the overall mythology had been enriched and enhanced, given extra layers. That being said, I did find the film a little long. And while pacing is never really an issue for me with most films that I watch, I will say I felt the runtime in this film on at least a few different occasions. During the initial period of the film, I was fine, but there was a period around maybe midway through where I'm just like, okay, things are starting to move a little slowly here. And then I started to question whether certain things that was happening in the film was either entirely necessary or that they could have been streamlined. Overall, it felt like this film could have lost at least 30 minutes and I would have had a much better time. And I understand that there are so many different things that need to be put in place in order for Furiosa's story to be told, especially when it comes to some of the people she interacts with. But I don't know, there was just certain times where I felt that runtime so hard. I'm just like, I'm not enjoying myself right now. I wouldn't say I was bored, but I was just aware that I'm not as invested as I should be in this because I felt like the time was just dragging a little bit, which was a shame. But beyond that, we can move on to the cast, and I thought that they were pretty solid. Anya Taylor-Joy does a really good job of inhabiting like the Furiosa character, but obviously with Furiosa being at a younger age, we get to see a totally different side of her, how she got from where she was as a child to where she became this more hardened warrior, and inhabiting some of the elements that Charlize Theron brought to the character in Fury Road. She was good. And obviously Anya Taylor-Joy, she's great. She's great in everything. And she did a really good job in this film. And I would say Chris Hemsworth as Dementus arguably stole the show with his larger-than-life screen presence and his humor. He clearly was just hamming it up, having a good time, but his character did this interesting thing where he could be humorous, but he could also be quite malicious and sinister when need be. Although that balance did sort of fluctuate at times to the point where I felt, oh, he's sometimes when he's supposed to be menacing, he would crack a joke or do something that was humorous that for me just sort of broke the illusion a little bit at times. But for the most part, Hemsworth was good. And Hume was really solid as the younger version of Immortan Joe. It was just nice to see Joe doing more in this film than he could in the in the future world of Fury Road. It was just nice to get a little bit more context for how he was at this period of time, who he surrounded himself with, and how he came into contact with Furiosa. And Tom Burke as Praetorian Jack was a cool little addition to this world, and he played his part pretty well. I didn't expect him to be in the film at all, but seeing what he did in there was pretty solid. And then you have the presentation, which I thought was good, but I don't think, especially when it comes to the visuals, that it was as impressive as the last. Again, Fury Road had this cool, tangible feeling to it where the dirt, the stunts, everything felt like it was mostly on screen. Now, if you pay attention to the world of visual effects and CGI, you will know that those elements were definitely implemented in Fury Road, where a lot of people will try to argue that Fury Road was all practical, which it was not. A good chunk of it was practical, but they did have digital enhancements in there as well. And I was hoping that this film was going to be a similar case where they did a fair bit practical, and then it was going to be like certain digital effects that enhance things. And while that's definitely on display, and you can tell the scenes that were on location that were done, physically, there is definitely a lot more CGI and visual effects on display than there was beforehand. But some of it in the way that the cinematography is done, it just feels more distracting than anything else. There's certain times where the use of green screen or CGI is just way more noticeable than it was before. And it was just like, I could see during some of the action sequences, especially during like one of the car chases, I can see why they wanted to go for some of the more dynamic and visceral shots, but it's not as good, unfortunately. But that's just me. I'm sure that there's a lot of people that didn't have an issue with that, but for me, when it comes to the polish of CGI, when it doesn't look as nice as something that you've seen before, you're just like, yeah. Plus, like, some of the action sequences in this film just didn't have the same oohs and ahs that came with Fury Road. But again, that kind of film is hard to replicate. And then when it comes to the film score, you have the return of Junkie XL. And he did a pretty good job with the previous film. But with this one, I feel like the music just didn't have that same oomph, that same sort of quality that you got from the previous one. And yeah, I don't know. There's just the music in this film just didn't feel as memorable as it could have been. So in the end, I think people will assume that like I disliked the film quite a bit, and that's not true. I'm just very particular about what I like with my films, and this film just didn't hit the high notes for me. It's still a good ass time, and I would recommend that if you haven't seen it, try to check it out, especially if you are a fan of Fury Road. But yeah, just know, in my opinion, it's solid, but just not quite there. Alright, and now we arrived at our final film today, which is Bad Boys Ride or Die. Now, I will admit, I wasn't super hyped about this new entry for a couple of reasons. One, whenever you reach the fourth entry in a series, there is a chance that the quality will decrease or not be as entertaining as what came before. And while there are definitely some exceptions to the rule, it's obviously like a case where most franchises you think of when they reach the fourth entry, things are definitely starting to feel like, you know, a cash grab, or it's just starting to feel desperate where they're just like, okay, let's just see how far we can take this thing. And two, even though I liked the previous entry quite a bit, I wasn't sure that there was a need to continue this franchise beyond Bad Boys 3. And number three, even though I liked the look of Ride or Die from the trailers, they didn't excite me in a way that, you know, a bunch of other 2024 films did. So, you know, I had all of those concerns coming into the film. But yeah, having seen the film, I think around 2 weeks ago at the time of this recording, yeah, the film won me over. And I have to say, I enjoyed it even more than the last one, which is saying a lot, because the last one was decent, but I feel like this one is an improvement. The directors, Adil and Bilal, at least I hope I'm saying their names correctly, it feels like they took what they learned from the previous film and built on that foundation. They steer their ship with a stronger sense of confidence in their direction. And I feel like the action and how they handle the characters in this, especially when it comes to the visual side of the presentation, it just feels like a stronger sense of focus and understanding of what they wanted to get out of this film, and it shows on screen. It's very simple yet effective material, and sometimes, like, you know, was it simple, dumb fun is necessary, and this film gave it to me. So yeah, just in terms of the plot, it follows the two main characters, like Detective Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett, who are attempting to basically clear the name of their late captain, Conrad Howard, after he's falsely accused of conspiracy. And that's a way for me to summarize the plot without going into the area of spoilers. So yeah, this is the kind of plot that you've seen before. Some of the reveals are the kind of stuff that, if you know your sort of action thriller, you know, genre material, then some of the reveals, some of the surprises, intrigue, and the way the plot progresses will not be a surprise to you at all, especially when it comes to how the villain is handled and certain things, how they play out. You'll be able to tell, okay, this person's dodgy or this thing's going to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of predictable elements in there, and some of that is to a fault, where there won't be any surprises. So if anyone's looking for something that's going to challenge the status quo a little bit, then you may be disappointed. But if you're willing to look past some of those elements and just experience the film as it's presented, then you're going to have a good time. I will say, though, that there are moments where this film deals with a lot of life and death related issues, and explores a little bit about, like, you know, was it the two main characters' mortality and how the job has taken a toll on them and how it affects their families. And this film goes into some crazy existential places that I didn't expect. Some of it is comedic and interesting, but some of it can be a little over the top to the point where I'm just like, okay, you're stretching things a little bit when we're just supposed to be watching a fun action film about two detectives, like, is it kicking ass and taking names, man? So, you need to dial some of that back a little bit. But yeah, when the film needed to be serious, it was serious. When it needed to be humorous, it was needed to be humorous. And I thought that the humor was pretty solid in the film. Not everything lands. There are some moments where they do play up Martin's more comedic / sillier elements to the point where it does take away from the film, or it just slows things down a little bit just for him to be a dummy, where you really should just be like, okay, you didn't need to do all that. We can speed this up a little bit. But I would say for the most part, about maybe 80% of the humor still works. And that's definitely down to the relationship of Mike and Marcus. They are still electric together, and that definitely helps that, obviously Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, they've known each other for so long that I feel like they know these characters pretty well. And they're still able to banter back and forth in a way that feels appropriate, feels fun, in various different scenarios, whether they're in the midst of a firefight or they're just having casual conversation with friends and family. Smith and Lawrence haven't lost their groove at all. They're still fun to watch. Will Smith is definitely the more action heavy of the two gentlemen. But one thing I really enjoyed about this film was that they gave Martin Lawrence more to do, because in the previous one, you could tell that he'd been out of the mix for a little while. His character didn't get to do nearly as much action, and I felt like he was just not as active, essentially. Whereas in this film, he is right in the thick of the action, especially during some of the firefights. He has way more screen time to just do his fun, silly Martin-esque things, not only solo, but also with Will. And again, it's just nice to see Martin Lawrence in the thick of the action, having more substance in terms of his role in this film as opposed to the previous one. And Vanessa Hudgens and Alexander Ludwig, I liked seeing them return as the two other cops who help out Marcus and Mike during their little adventures and whatnots. And even though he was only in the film for a little bit, seeing Joe Pantoliano, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, who played the captain, even if it was for a short bit in was it these posthumous videos, he was still pretty fun in the film as well. The villain isn't much to write home about, so he just does his generic villain thing, but yeah, you don't need to pay attention to him too much. Tiffany Haddish shows up in this film in a small yet notable role, which was pretty darn good. Eoin Grufford, I like that guy quite a bit. It's been a while since I've seen him in a major notable film, but I thought he was pretty good in this film. And Rhea Seehorn, she's the daughter of Captain Howard, and I thought she brought some interesting stuff to this film as well. Again, I can't go into why she's interesting in this film, but when you see it, it's oh, okay, it's pretty solid. But I gotta give it up to my boy Dennis McDonald, who played Reggie. Yes, my boy Reggie is back again, and he has a pretty notable part to play in this film. For longtime fans of Bad Boys 2, seeing how far Reggie has come since that film to this one, he did a damn good job, so yeah. And then we move on to the presentation, which was, again, really, really solid. I quite enjoyed all the crazy camera work that was done with this film. These guys implement a use of, your standard cameras, but also drones for these crazy elaborate shots where people are punching, kicking, and shooting each other, with sometimes explosions and crazy debris flying all over the place. These guys are very meticulous about how they chose to shoot this film, where everything is super over the top and crazy. Some stuff happening in real time speed and stuff in slow motion. You've got certain long takes here and there, and it's just it's very elaborate and well done. And I feel like they've created so many different scenarios for these guys to just shoot all these crazy action scenes, and it just feels like they've stepped up the action way more so than the previous one. And while it's not as distinctive and unique as the Michael Bay editions of the action that's come with this franchise. Clearly, these guys have tried to up the ante in terms of the amount of explosions, flames, and dangerous situations they can put these characters in. So I quite enjoyed that. And when it comes to the music, I was surprised to find out that Lorne Balfe was the composer for this, where it feels like he's borrowed certain elements from the previous films but created his own unique spin on it, which it works, it's fine. It's just not like, crazy memorable. But yeah, overall, while this film doesn't have the Michael Bay isms that made this franchise what it is, I feel like, again, these directors have done a really great job of creating another solid entry in this series that progressed Mike and Marcus's story in a satisfying way and created a very entertaining action film that was super elaborate, crazy, silly, and humorous, but in all the right ways. This is the kind of is it feel good, dumb action that makes me happy. So I'm happy that it exists. All right, and now I turn it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Now I want to hear your thoughts on the films that I just talked about. Did you like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes? Did you like Furiosa? Did you like Bad Boys, Ride or Die? Did you like either or none of the films above? Please let me know in the comment section below, or holler at me on Twitter where I'm at Hypersonic55 or at FilmFocus55. Be sure to check out the podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and all other places where podcasts can be found. And yeah, I guess that's it for now. Thank you for listening as always, and look forward to the next episode when it comes. But until the next time, this is the Hypersonic55 signing out. Peace.